So you prefer me to call you Rob?
Yeah, Rob will work.
Okay, and Andy
Andrew's good?
Andy works better.
Andy? Okay. Okay, we'll do that. Waiting to get the notification that we are live.
Okay.
Oh, I think we are now. All right.
Turn off the phone.
Great.
I'm on
Well, thanks for everybody who's watching. This is Litchfield Community Television, Litchfield, New Hampshire. We had the great opportunity to interview Andru Volinsky, gubernatorial candidate for governor. He didn't realize it until a little while ago that we had met previously, about over 20 years ago. When I went in a different life, when I was a videographer for WNDS in Derry. Andrew was the lawyer and representing a group of communities, Claremont being one of them, and called the Claremont lawsuit. Is that what it's called? What was it called back then?
Claremont school funding case.
That's what it was. And it was about how it was, the lawsuit was claiming that it was unfair the way New Hampshire funds education, correct?
Yes.
So.
And a bunch of others.
So, and it really hasn't changed much since then. A lot of governors won't even dive into it. That's what we've noticed since then. So talk a little about the back then what the lawsuit was about, and if any changes came from that back then, and then we'll get to what you wrote today in the Concord Monitor.
Sure. Thank you for having me, and thanks for everyone for watching. So I am Andru Volinsky. I'm running as a Democrat for governor. I was the lead lawyer in the Claremont school funding case. I organized and led a team of up to 18 lawyers who contributed thousands of hours of time so that we could make clear just how challenged the schools were in places like Claremont, and how in the most stressed communities in our state, they often paid the highest taxes. So a highest need, highest taxes, they produced the least for their kiddos. And so not only did we work hard to expose that problem, we went to court and convinced the New Hampshire Supreme Court that children have a constitutional right to education, that it's a state responsibility, and we need to pay for it fairly. And we still haven't done that. It's been a failure of political leadership, and quite frankly, that is why I'm running for governor, to finally address the Claremont principles. The promise of Claremont is still there. I should say, for your benefit and for that of the Facebook watchers, when I went to Claremont, it was a lot like going home for me. I grew up in a failed mill town in eastern Pennsylvania where many people lost their jobs. I'm the only person in my family to go to college. My dad was a mechanic and a maintenance man and a shop steward in a union. And I went to college on scholarship. I paid for my first year of law school by working as a carpenter. It is a different background that I have than most lawyers, and I really related to what I saw in Claremont because I realized how important education has been for me. That was 25, 27 years ago, and we haven't fixed it. And largely we haven't fixed it because political leaders of both parties have taken what's called the pledge. And the pledge is a promise never to think about, never to talk about, never to consider changing how our revenue system works. And I think it's time to have an adult conversation about that. I trust the people of New Hampshire to have that conversation. And as governor, I would push that conversation forward with all options on the table.
Right. And that's what you wrote pretty much today in the Concord Monitor about. Yep. A pledge worth taking is what it was called. People can click on it and read that. I think you can get 2 free articles at the Concord Monitor before they want to charge you. So you can go do it.
Yep,
so you've been an executive counselor since 2017.
Yes.
Can you just go a little bit into that and how that's been and what you've learned from that and what you've learned about the process from the inside?
Yeah, it's been a great experience. This is the first time I've held public office. I'm in my second term. I represent District 2, which is just above Litchfield. I think Ted Gatsis is your executive counselor in District 4. So the executive council is like New Hampshire's board of directors. We meet frequently with the governor. We have to approve his nominees for important positions in state government and to become judges. We have to approve all contracts over $10,000. We have a big role in the transportation planning process. A couple of us worked hard to advance commuter rail to Nashua and Manchester and got a $4 million bond or $4 million grant to advance that. So we're able to be a check on the power of the governor. The governor, in my opinion, has made some very poor appointments. Frank Edelblue, the head of the Commissioner of Education, is New Hampshire's Betsy DeVos, and he's intent on dismantling public education by diverting public money to private schools. And I've opposed Mr. Edelblue a number of times. The same is true with Gordon MacDonald. The governor put him up to be the Chief Justice, the top judge of our Supreme Court, yet he's never been a judge at all before and never completed a jury trial. He also has a 30-year documented history of antagonism towards reproductive rights. That's a concern for me, and a number of us opposed him, and now Sununu's kept that seat open. So if he's reelected, he's going to put Gordon MacDonald in it, and we need to be very, very careful about that. It's one of the big issues. I would say also that climate change is a big issue. I happen to be a grandfather. My second grandson was born 8 weeks ago. I haven't been able to hold him yet because he lives in Denver. My wife's about to take my truck and start driving to Denver as a result. But I think about climate change through the lens of a grandfather, and I worry about the future we're leaving our children and our children's children. And that's why I adamantly oppose the construction of a fracked gas pipeline. I'm the only one in this race who does that, who opposes it. Chris Sununu and my opponent in the primary both support that, both take fossil fuel money. It's a problem for a state that is small and dependent on the New England power grid. We can do a lot better with solar and wind. And in my administration, if I'm elected, that's what we'll do.
Yeah, Litchfield was going to be a spot where a gas line was proposed to go through a few years ago. So yeah, it's definitely something the residents in Litchfield were sensitive to, and it's not, nobody wanted it. I mean, there were a few outliners that said, oh, if it's near your house, they're going to give you all this money, but no, it wasn't really very popular. And we were happy to see that other towns that were going to be affected had a nice committee and were able to get them to change their mind.
I think that was called the Northeast Direct Pipeline.
That sounds right, yeah.
Started in my district in the Southwest, just below Keene, and came all the way across to Litchfield and over to Nashua, I believe. And it too was a fracked gas pipeline. Fracking is terrible for the environment, and we shouldn't be building new infrastructure at a time when we only have a handful of years to bend the curve on carbon and reduce our carbon usage. So I say the time for half measures is gone, and we can't afford to do just one more project with one more set of excuses. We need to be clear. That's why I'm endorsed by the Sierra Club and New Hampshire Youth Movement and a number of others who are interested in the environment.
What other environmental issues in the state do you see as a big issue?
Well, down near your area, you have PFAS and PFOAs that are a really big problem. We need to make the polluters be responsible for what they put in our air and water. And we have done some of that work, but we haven't gone as far as we should. Your wells shouldn't be fouled by PFAS seeping into it. And so that's an issue that we need to address. There are some people at the Department of Environmental Services trying to do their best on that. They have limited resources, and we need to get them more resources so that we can better protect the environment. One of the things I would work on is during the first 60 days of my term is I would create the Agency for Climate, Energy, and the Environment, and I would assign to it the responsibility to build a citizen-informed plan to get New Hampshire state government to carbon neutral by 2030. There are a number of things we can do in that regard: conservation, solar, wind. We can do cashback carbon work, but it needs to be a priority. And so you need to name it. You need to be on top of that issue.
Yeah, the PFOAs and that we found that seeped into our wells up in the north side of town from St. Gobain.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if they have settled in court, but I know that people had to, the hookup to Pennachuck was paid for by St. Gobain, but there were things like, well, now my yard's ripped up. Who's paying for that?
Right.
And now in St. Gobain, I think is not going to paying for anything else. And I don't know if there's anything pending, but there are a lot of people in town that think that they should be paying for their water bill for at least a few years, 10 years, something, because it's not their fault that their wells got polluted, and they should be compensated or at least break even.
Right. That's part of the problem is the polluters aren't paying the full cost, and they need to. And I think that's part of a responsibility for our Environmental Services Department. It's part of a responsibility for our Attorney General. Individual homeowners shouldn't have to go out and find a lawyer and figure all this out. We should be doing it as a state, and I would. And so that's something of a difference between the governor and me. The governor's also a denier of climate change. He doesn't believe it's reality, and I think it's on us. It's like the COVID pandemic. We need to deal with it, and it's laying bare some of the problems we have in society today. The social safety net has a number of holes in it, and we need to recognize that and start fixing it.
Thanks. We had one question, but it was about the environment, so we'd already started talking about it before it came up. We have another question that is a little controversial, but it's well written and it's intelligent. So it's about diversity in gubernatorial picks has been a topic of discussion, as we know. What makes someone a token versus a viable candidate in your eyes if they meet listed criteria for the position, or if you feel they even meet the listed criteria for the position?
So look, I've used the same approach for every gubernatorial nominee. Has the person shown a documented commitment to the mission of the agency? So was Frank Adelblue committed to supporting public education? Was Pete Kajowski committed to supporting the environment? He was not. He didn't know anything about it. So I look first, is there a commitment? And then I look second, what kind of tools and experiences does this person bring to the agency in question? Have they any experience? And I'm sensitive to the fact that younger people, that people of color can be excluded from certain experiences. But I think your Facebook question writer is talking about a young man who never volunteered in a school. So he lived in 3 different communities, around Manchester and Nashua, and never spent the time to go into the public schools. And so now I know from Facebook posts by Bill O'Brien and by the Commissioner of Education, Frank Edelblue, that he's got the same approach that they do, which is to dismantle public education. And so I didn't know that at the time, but I looked carefully. I tried to get to the bottom of why is this person here before us? And if I can't answer that question, I can't really support the person.
Thank you. Thanks for the question on Facebook. Don't have any others right this second. So let's talk a little bit about COVID-19 and how it's affected New Hampshire, how you think Governor Sununu has responded, and if there's anything you would have done differently.
Yeah. So, as compared to the president, Chris Sununu is not advising anyone to drink Clorox. So he's overcome that low bar. I think when this started, he and I had some very direct discussions about how to prepare for an emergency. We needed to talk sooner about school closing. We need to talk sooner about what his emergency powers were. And he was unwilling to do it because Mike Pence had told him this would be like the flu. And he wasn't taking it seriously. And therefore, the schools were announced that they would close on Sunday afternoon for Monday morning. So we had no notice whatsoever. That's a product of not taking this seriously. More recently, the governor and I had a discussion about wearing facial coverings or masks in public. I think the public health data is pretty clear that if we wear masks in indoor spaces that are public, we can shut down the virus. And the experience in Florida and Texas show what happens when you fail to do that. When I raised this with the governor, he said public health data doesn't support that. It's just not true. The public health data is pretty clear that we can make headway against this virus, and the consequences of failure are pretty severe if we just follow the public health guidance on this and model good behavior, which the governor hasn't really done. So I think we should have shut down more severely earlier so that we could open up more directly and more broadly. I am very worried that we're looking at a second wave and that that's going to be a problem for our state. I would also add, there's a coalition of New England and Northeastern states that have been working together to try and open up in a reasonable, responsible way. Governor Sununu's kept New Hampshire out of that coalition. Every other state, Republican and Democrat, they're all in it. I think from like Pennsylvania north, but not New Hampshire. I think we need to join with the other states and work at this collectively.
How about the funding that the federal government has given for COVID-19 and the way it's been dispersed or not dispersed in New Hampshire? Do you have any opinion on that?
Yeah, property taxes were due yesterday, and almost every local town, city, school district will have a big gaping hole in their revenues because people are out of work and unable to pay their property taxes. I've asked Sununu to devote some of the CARES Act relief money to filling those holes in local budgets so that property taxes don't go up on everybody else. Under Chris Sununu, property taxes have gone up $320 million during his term. I'm afraid that with the post-COVID economy, he's going to turn to the property tax again and balance the state's budget on the local property tax, which is probably the most unfair way to do it.
When people talk about live free or die in New Hampshire, they talk about, oh, you don't have the sales tax, you don't have income tax. We do have a lot of other taxes. In order to put a big dent in the way we collect property taxes and how we fund education, are you in your vision looking at a sales tax or an income tax, or is there other ways to do it?
My view is we have to put every option on the table. It's what Jean Shaheen did in her third term when she refused to take the pledge, like I'm refusing to take the pledge. I think if we do that and we trust the people of the state, we can have a good, honest conversation that leads us to some just and fair solutions. So for me, I'm not particularly an income tax advocate, but I think all the options need to be on the table, and the legislature needs to present the kind of package that is fair to people so that Mitt Romney pays his fair share. Mitt Romney's tax rate is less than half of yours in Litchfield.
Because it's just dividend tax.
Well, it's because he's got a property on the lake. So his property taxes are really low because the property is so valuable. But a teacher who lives in Litchfield pays more than twice what Mitt Romney pays. And a family between jobs in Claremont and Berlin pays 3 and 4 times the rate of taxation. That's not fair, and that's not right for something that is a state responsibility.
I'm willing to listen to a state sales tax a little bit because so much of it is out of state purchasing in the summer and in the winter for skiing, and the summer for visiting the lakes and stuff. A lot of the sales tax will be on the burden of tourists. That's why I kind of lean towards sales tax, but that's just me. So what about
I want
20 years ago
in the conversation, because that is a consideration. And, Mitt Romney's never going to pay an income tax because he doesn't live here full time and he doesn't work here. So there are shortcomings in that.
Exactly. So how better off would we have been if 20 years ago Lou D'Alessandro got a racetrack in Salem turned into a casino?
I'm not going to bet on the result of the outcome of that. I don't know. I think that ship has sailed.
It has now.
It has now. If we'd been first, maybe it would have made a difference. But, the same problem exists with legalization of marijuana. All the states around us have legalized marijuana except for New Hampshire for adult use. And so is Canada. And they're all taxing it. We're not. And then there are a whole other set of problems with criminalization of marijuana that we need to address.
Right. That's another one. So talking about the way Governor Sununu has handled COVID. I mean, the last poll that I looked up was April, last week of April from St. A's. And it's got a pretty good approval rating. It's going to be a steep climb for you to get to change minds. What's your plan to get people to see your side of the story when he's got an 87 or 85% approval rating for the way he's handled the COVID situation?
I think there are problems in his handling of the COVID, but I think there are also other concerns. He vetoed an increase in the minimum wage. He vetoed the effort to lift the cap on net metering, which would have advanced solar and wind. He's held that seat open so the anti-choice Gordon MacDonald can become Chief Justice. He continues to advance Frank Edelblu's agenda to dismantle public education. I think there are plenty of issues to talk about, and Sununu is responsible for the property taxes going up and up and up, and we need to hold him to account for that. So I think there are some ways to make contrasts with the governor, and I think I'm the better candidate to do that.
You were endorsed recently by a couple of groups.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about them and what they stand for and why that's meaningful to you?
Yeah. So last night, as a matter of fact, it was announced at the Renew New England rally, which is a coalition of racial justice, labor organizations, and grassroots organizations. And they endorsed me in my run for governor through Rights and Democracy, which is a grassroots organization, and the New Hampshire Youth Movement, which is a large collection of young people, I think under 30 in our state, who voted to endorse me 94 to 6%. So that's not bad. I'm also endorsed by the Sierra Club and the Postal Workers Union, and Ben and Jerry have endorsed me. And they're naming an ice cream after me called Volinsky Courageous Crunch.
Nice.
So that impresses my kids.
That should. So what's in the Courageous Crunch? Do you have any idea?
Not yet. I'm waiting for it to show up at our local stores.
All right, we still don't. No one else has asked any questions yet, so we'll get back into some of the. We talked a little bit about the funds from COVID and the way they've been used. A lot of people are having trouble getting the small business loans, or one of the caveats was you had to have a business that is over a year old, and there are people who had started a business 9 months ago, and now they're stuck. What are other things that you've noticed?
Well, I've noticed a few things. The New Hampshire unemployment system is overtaxed because there's so many claims, and I understand and appreciate that they need to catch up. But one of the things we did wrong is Sununu got out there and said, if you're self-employed, you're in the gig economy, you run a small business, you too can get unemployment benefits. And that's true, but he didn't tell the public that it would be weeks before they became eligible. So everyone applied and they all got rejected, and they had to go back and reapply again and reapply again. That's created an unnecessary burden on the system and an unnecessary degree of frustration for those business owners. So that's an unnecessary problem that just being honest and transparent would have helped us with. There have been a number of insider sweetheart deal, no bid contracts, multi-million contracts for Sununu contributors to do staffing work for healthcare providers when hospitals in your area and in my area and just north of us are all laying off health professionals. So I think CMC laid off 1,300 people, many of them nurses and other kinds of health professionals. I don't understand why you would go to a privately owned contributors company, Convenient MD, for them to find nurses for you to deploy throughout the state. I'd rather you go to CMC, pay them a little bit of those funds and get their workers moving again. The same with Lakes Region General Hospital, who had about 600 layoffs. We didn't need to go the contributor route. It's a problem.
All right, we only got a few minutes left. Is there anything else you want to add before we let go? And thanks again for coming on Litchfield Community Television and talking to the town here. We a couple of issues that directly impacted us with the fracking and the PFOA. So that was a good conversation. Anything else you want to add before we let you go tonight?
Well, I think your taxpayers have a high burden, and it's higher than other communities because not everyone pays their fair share. And if you take the pledge, the old union leader pledge, you get chained to the past. And I think this is the time we're at a crossroads. This is the time to look towards the future and move New Hampshire forward for school children, for taxpayers, for working people. And I'd like to be the governor who does that.
All right. Thanks for your time.
Rob, it's good to see you again.
Nice to see you again. Hope it's not another 22 years before we see each other again.
Absolutely. Take good care.
I'll be around the polls on a primary day. If you're in the Manchester area, maybe we'll run into each other.
That'd be great. I look forward to it.
We'll see you. Thanks for